It all started on a Friday night. My girlfriend, Alice, and I decided to hit the road for a long weekend getaway. We were excited to enjoy the solitude and silence of the forested countryside. We took a shortcut to save some time, a narrow back road surrounded by dense trees, with barely any other cars passing by. The atmosphere was calm until something strange caught Alice's attention. She glanced in the rearview mirror and said, "Lucas, did you see that?" I was focused on driving, but I quickly glanced in the mirror. There was a man standing in the middle of the road, motionless, wearing a dark coat. What scared me was that we were going nearly 100 kilometers per hour, yet he seemed to stay in place, almost as if he was watching us. A chill ran down my spine. I sped up, but no matter how fast I drove, he seemed to get closer. He wasn't walking, it was like he was floating beside the car. His eyes were nothing but dark hollows, and he started to smile, a smile that didn't look human. I wanted to look away, but I was frozen in place. It wasn't until Alice screamed that I snapped out of it. The car jolted, and everything went back to normal. I looked back one more time, and the figure was gone. I still can't explain what we saw that night, but we never took that shortcut again. When I checked the map the next day, that road didn't even exist. My two best friends, Pedro and Marcello, and I decided to go on a road trip to a secluded cabin in a national park. It was a trip we had been planning for months, and we were excited. Everything was going great until we noticed an old van following us. At first, we didn't think much of it. It could have just been another traveler heading in the same direction. But after half an hour, the van was still behind us, keeping a steady distance. Pedro, who was driving, suggested we stop at a convenience store to see if the vehicle would pass us by. When we parked, the van pulled in right behind us. I tried to see inside, but the windows were covered with black curtain. My heart started to race. Marcello, always the bravest, walked over to ask if they needed help, but before he could say anything, the driver sped off, nearly hitting him. We ran back to the car, and Pedro decided to take an unexpected turn onto a deserted road. The van kept following us, even on this isolated path, for nearly an hour. We drove in fear. Then, suddenly, the van vanished without a trace. We felt relieved, but when we reached the cabin, we found a note stuck to our windshield. "You got away this time, but I'm always watching." We reported it to the police, but no one was able to track down the van. Even now, I get paranoid every time I see a strange car behind me on the highway. It was supposed to be a simple drive to my parents' house. I was driving alone on a rural road when I realized I was lost, with no GPS signal and running low on gas. The road was deserted, and I started to panic. That's when I saw a small motel in the distance, its sign flickering faintly. It looked like something out of an old horror movie, but I had no other choice. When I walked in, I was greeted by a strange-looking man who stared at me with a wide smile, his eyes never blinking. He offered me a room, insisting that it was dangerous to continue driving at that hour. Exhausted, I agreed. The room smelled of mold, and the bed creaked with every move, but I was so tired that I fell asleep almost immediately. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a disturbing noise. It sounded like someone dragging something heavy down the hallway. I peeked through the curtain and saw the receptionist, the creepy man, pulling a black bag, the kind you see in crime movies. My heart nearly stopped. He looked directly at me, as if he knew I was watching. I grabbed my things and ran out of the room. As I passed the front desk, he was standing there, smiling that same unsettling smile. The next day, I went to the police to report what had happened. The officer looked at me with a serious expression and said that the motel had been closed for over 10 years, and the man I described was a suspect in several disappearances. I've never driven alone on that road again, and even now, I still see his face when I close my eyes.